Hello, we are live. We are live here on the Nightworms YouTube channel.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. With me today is, let's do little introductions and we'll start with you, Seth.
Thank you so much for that, Sadie. I appreciate it. I am C.S. Humble. I'm the author of that Light Sublime trilogy that's published by Cemetery Dance, which is a horror adventure trilogy that I'm very proud of. The final installment, The Light of a Black Star, came out in November of last year. I'm also the author of the Blackwell series, which is about to be republished in 2024 by Cemetery Dance, and the third book in the series for its first publication sometime in November of 2024. So I'm primarily a religious trauma writer.
I cannot wait for the Blackwell series to come back to the market. I am so tired of wanting to recommend it to people and then being like, wait, though, it's not out there anymore. Really looking forward to that. And I highly recommend that Light Sublime trilogy. Everybody has to read it. You absolutely don't know what to expect. No one looking at the covers or reading the synopsis knows anything about how hard that book hits.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you to say.
Yeah. So
I concur with all of that. Yes. I'm Ray Knowles, and I'm the author of The Stradivarius and Merciless Waters. I was also a co-editor on Scissor Sisters, which comes out in 4 days, which is a anthology of sapphic horror. So that's really exciting. And I'm just excited to close the loop because we got to talk about openings several months ago. I don't know how long ago that was. Now we're going to do endings.
Yes. I also like to say the title of that book, Scissor Sisters. It's a really fun, it rolls off the tongue really well.
Thank you.
I see a bunch of our friends in the chat, so I just want to shout out to Dennis and Sapphire and Sophia. Hello, hello. Also, I just read yesterday in one sitting. I did not get up off the couch except to make another cup of tea. So I had 2 cups of tea while I was reading Ray Knowles' book, Merciless Waters. And it was a smoke show. I had so much fun reading it. It has pirates. It has rituals on the pirate ship. It has sexy women doing sexy things and also scary things. It's folklore, it's fairy tale, it's fierce and feminine. There's so much energy and power. I loved it. It was so much fun.
Thank you so much. You're making me blush already. I think the sexiest thing a woman can do is be scary. So I think it overlaps very easily for me.
To that. Seth, do you agree?
Is that for me? Well, this isn't that type of podcast. We don't need to. I don't think this is a kink podcast.
Our next gathering will be sexy books.
That's right. Sexy books.
The 3 of us.
Right.
Yeah, I do have opinions about that as well. But today we're talking about our favorite, and it doesn't have to necessarily be favorite, but maybe memorable endings to books. Mine are really memorable. I wouldn't say they're like my favorite endings, but they're the ones that really just kind of popped into my head as soon as I thought about endings. So how about Ray? Do you want to go first with your favorite or one of your favorites?
Yeah. So as a surprise to probably no one who follows me on social media, This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is my all-time favorite book.
Wow.
And so we talked briefly before we went live that we're going to avoid spoilers, which is going to be a challenge for me personally, but I'm going to do my absolute best. And I think what I want to talk about in general today is the different styles of ending. And my favorite style of ending, which happens in this book, is when the authors have been braiding something this whole time. And you've thought it was like a 3-strand braid. and you get to the end and realize it's been 12 strands this whole time, that they've been weaving things that you didn't even notice. You know, it's escaped, but when you see it coming together, you realize like it was there the whole time. They planted all these seeds and got them right by me. And this book does a fantastic job of doing that.
I love the way you put that. It gave me goosebumps.
Thank you. So I have highlights, but now I'm worried that they're going to be spoilers. So
yeah. I haven't read that book.
Oh, then I definitely, you need to, please, Sadie, immediately read. Like, so, and I'll say this isn't a horror book, and I don't read sci-fi. So I'm so glad Sophia, actually, who is here, insisted that I read this book. And so it's sci-fi, but I'm going to say that this is a romance wearing a sci-fi cloak.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, so not my usual genre, but it just does such a beautiful job of, like I said, planting all these seeds the whole time in really beautiful ways, and bringing it all together just impeccably, like without missing.
Well, I'm sold. Sophia said I would love it. Seth has also recommended it.
Correct.
Now you are recommending it, so I hear you. I'm on it.
Sapphire said, not a horror, my ass, I'm still wrecked. Yes, correct. I still haven't recovered from this book, and I've read it 5 times, and I'm still gutted.
That's a great one. Let's see, if I were to go next, I would want to talk about, so if we were to specifically talk about a horror novel, there's the seminal horror Western that currently exists is probably Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. And the reason that it works so well is because the beginning of the novel starts with a phrase that McCarthy sort of steals the mechanical quality from Melville, where the beginning of Moby Dick says, "Call me Ishmael," right? So it starts with a command, right? A lot of books don't start with commands. They start with a setting. They start with something to prop up what's about to come next, right? But so McCarthy steals this sort of command gesture where he says, "See the child." That's the first sentence of the book. And the rest of the novel is you witnessing all the things happening to the child, who then grows into the boy, who then becomes the man, never gets a name. And he's interacting with this really creepy Luciferian style antagonist known as the Judge Holden. And throughout the novel, there's a bunch of stuff going on. There's a lot. It's a super brutal novel. It's not for everybody. It's certainly not for everybody. And McCarthy style is not for everybody either. But what makes the ending great is that it, like Moby Dick, is about a great white predator who is such a force and such a power, almost divine in stature, who then takes the protagonist of the novel and completely consumes him in a way that the reader does not suspect. And the ending of the book is particularly harrowing because it ends on a cosmic horror spin that you absolutely are not expecting. And so anyone who's looking to sort of see how to do a grand slow burn build to a tragic ending, Blood Meridian is certainly one of the books that you want to take a look at. If you can get all the way there, like I said, there's some real brutal stuff in there, but it's absolutely worth it. And for me, it's always been worth it for all the times that I've read it. But Blood Meridian for me is one of the greatest endings of all time.
Sounds like a challenge.
I can't say I enjoyed reading it, but I'm glad I did. Yeah, it's challenging.
What about you, Lou?
The first one I want to talk about is Hawk Mountain. So the reason why I chose this one is to talk about my affinity for ambiguous endings. I kind of have this pet peeve with authors who feel like they need to spoon feed everything to their audience and tell us how to feel. It's almost like watching a movie, like a horror movie, and the spooky music starts up and you're like, okay, now I know I have to be scared. This book just is. It just is. It just like relays events as they are unfolding. There is a growing sense of tension and anxiety that was actually physically burning inside of my chest. It felt even hard to breathe while I was reading it, where I was just kind of like, I don't know where this is going, but it's making me very unsettled. I'm very nervous. And then the ending, I don't know exactly what happens, but I think I know what happened. And I hate what happened. The fact that the author doesn't very clearly spell it out for you makes it that much more troubling to me, because I sat there with it for about 5 minutes where I was like, if what just happened that I think happened, it better not have, but I don't know. So I get to just walk away from this, not really knowing. But I did message Connor Habib. And I asked him, and he said he wasn't going to tell me. So
that's perfect.
Rude. That's exactly how I met Paul Tremblay as well. I finished A Head Full of Ghosts. I messaged him. I asked him what happened. He said, "What do you think happened?" I said, "That's not funny." And then we became friends. So yeah, Hawk Mountain, read it. Stressful.
That is so funny. I think you might have sold me on Hawk Mountain between you and I obviously trust Sophia's recommendations, and they are saying to read it too.
Yeah, yes. It is really wonderful. It just completely wrong decisions, one right after the other. So
perfect.
It's a good time.
I love ambiguous endings too. But this next one I picked is not ambiguous. It is The Exorcist. But this is another style of ending that I love. And I think of it as a bookended ending. So when the author sort of starts with one thing and also ends with one thing. And in this case, it's a character, right? Like we open on a character and then we also close with that character. At least in my opinion, the most significant part of the ending closes with that character. And I just love the feeling of like that circular feeling. And it also does for me, I heard in some masterclass years ago that when you open, you want the reader to feel like you're saying, I'm going to tell you a secret, but you have to hang in there with me. But I promise I'm going to tell you at the end. And that's what this approach does for me. When we start with one character and then we immediately move away from them, it leaves me curious the whole book of well, why did we start here? That was a significant choice. And it builds that dread for the entire span of the book until that character returns. And then, of course, it all comes together. And I think we have another book on our list that does a similar thing, but it's just so satisfying to me when we finally get back to the character and understand why. It's like, yes.
I love that too. Seth actually does that really well in the trilogy. There are lots of circle backs, which for very intentional readers who, collect breadcrumbs from their authors, and we store them in our pockets, we're waiting for those to come back to us. It's like a return on our investment. So like you were saying, when those three, if you thought of it as a braid and then you see that there were 12 strands instead of 3 and everything comes together in these full pictures, that just means the author was really paying attention.
Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I agree with both of you. And thank you, Sadie. That's very sweet of you to say. So just to piggyback on The Exorcist for a second, it is wonderful, at least it is for me, to see when an author can begin their book with one big breath, right? And then the rest of the novel is one long expression that goes throughout the entirety of the novel, so that when you get to the end of it, you can feel the resolution. It's almost like, so there's this composer He's one of the great American composers of the modern period. His name's Benjamin Zander. And he says that great music, and I think this is true about great writing, is that at the end of it, all of it feels like one long journey to get home, right? And Blatty's Exorcist does that because it begins with a place of worry, with tension, anxiety, and it takes this one long breath all the way to get through to say resolution, home, but still bittersweet, because going back home is always bittersweet once you've been gone for a long time, especially as a child. But the other one I would want to talk about is my guy, Josh Roundtree, wrote a book called The Legend of Charlie Fish, which I think every single person should read.
Yes.
I've said this before, but I'm going to continue to say it, that I think that Josh Roundtree is the best pure Western writer currently working today. I think that he understands the genre, the art form, more than just the genre. He understands the art form of the American Western as well as anyone who's currently working in it. And The Legend of Charlie Fish has this wonderful ability, and I think this is what Ray was talking about, where we begin with one particular character in a certain time, certain place, right? And then we go through this story where we sort of we filter back to the moments that led up to this point. And then so we start with the flashback, and then the flashback comes back to the epilogue. And I would say for those who haven't read The Legend of Charlie Fish, the epilogue for The Legend of Charlie Fish is the second best epilogue I've ever read. That includes every book. Like, I'm not excluding the classics. I'm not saying just the modern workers, in the industry. I'm saying that the epilogue for that is one of the sweetest, most brutal, and tender endings that I've ever read. And so if you have not read it, it's a masterclass in how to bring everything back full circle.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's
bravo
stunning.
to Josh.
Yeah,
It's
I remember you celebrating that epilogue. That was impactful for you.
He's wonderful.
Sophia said that the way you explain things is so poetic. You should be a teacher if you aren't already one.
I am not a teacher. Well, I mean, I'm not a professional
You're at
teacher.
school right now.
I'm taking everybody to school right now. Get your lunch pails. Tell your mom I'm picking you up.
Perfect.
I love that. I love Charlie Fish too. Okay. The one that I have right here in my hand is a book that started a trend on social media called #WhatTheFuckDidIJustRead. So at the end of this book, I immediately said those exact words in my post, and then people were hashtagging it in the comments saying, like, everybody has said the same thing. We were all reading it at the same time. And it is
#trendsetter.
yeah, Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pimborough. This definitely is a what the fuck just happened type of book, where I love when an author can intricately orchestrate, plot, and execute a thriller where the twists and turns are so blindsiding. You either need someone who has already read it so you can freak out with them, or you have to be on something like social media where you can, hashtag it and then go look at other people's posts and feel that sense of community, that validation. Like when you're in a movie theater and everyone at the same time is like, it feels so good to be in community with other people when those kinds of things are happening. And this ending blindsided me. I did not see this coming. It's sort of like gold standard thriller 101, this and Gone Girl and a few others, but basically this is just the story of, like, a triangle, a love triangle, and they can project. I don't want to spoil anything. Okay. There's just like some sort of dream projection going on, okay? And at the end, you are left with your mouth dropped open. And I think that is one effective way to close a book. It's not the only way. I mean, sometimes we do need some tender moments. Like I was thinking of The Reformatory by Tananarive Due, if she didn't give me the ending that she gave me, I probably would still be on the floor after just reading it. But she gave me a tender moment. And some books just want to, devastate you. So that's this.
Behind Her Eyes, Sarah Pimbrough.
Yes, a perfectly orchestrated horror thriller.
Wonderful.
Yes.
So I'm going to go off script just a little bit because I thought of this, and then what you just said, Sadie, it leads into it perfectly. And it's The Last House on Needless Street from Katrina Ford.
Yes.
And to me, like, the big twist ending is so good when it's done right, but it's so hard to do it right. It's striking that perfect balance of sprinkling in enough clues that the reader doesn't feel like cheated at the end. Like, what? That came out of nowhere, but not enough that they see it coming the whole time. And The Last House on Needless Street really did that for me. It's very hard to talk about that book without spoilers, but I'll say there's a point of view character that is a cat called Olivia. And what happens to Olivia is the most emotional I have ever gotten reading, period, ever. And it's so masterfully done. And going back to Masterclass again, I guess I have this on the brain tonight. I also heard give them what they want, but not in the way they're expecting.
Yeah.
And it does that so perfectly. Like, anyone who's ever heard of The Last House on Needless Street knows, they hear there's this huge twist. There's this huge twist. And even with knowing that, you do not see it coming. And that's, to me, a sign of brilliance on the part of the author.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm the kind of reader, I don't know if people in the comments will be able to relate, but I'm the kind of reader who just kind of gets in the back seat and goes with the author wherever they're going. I do not try to drive. I do not sit in the passenger seat. I don't say turn right, turn left. I'm not even paying attention to the mechanics like a lot of people are, Seth. But I just want to go where you're taking me. And so those intricately plotted storylines that are just like smacks on each cheek, I love that because I never see those coming. I never see it coming.
I love it too, but I'm the opposite, Sadie. I'm looking for it the whole time. Like Seth can attest, when I was reading his trilogy, I'd be like, this is going to happen, isn't it? Because I read this line. And so I think you're trying to prepare us for this. And he told me one way or another, but I'm like on the hunt. So when you can really surprise me, I'm like, well,
bravo. Yeah. I know there are readers like that for sure.
That's great. I think my third one that I have for anyone who's ever heard me on a podcast ever, or who has talked to me for more than 20 minutes, will know that my favorite ending is to George R.R. Martin's Fever Dream. Fever Dream is a story, effectively, what if Mark Twain and Count Dracula went on a steamboat trip together and platonically fell in love with each other.
It is like that.
It is. And there's a wonderful sense, like Anne Rice did a great deal for vampires in fiction. She resurrected the genre, innovated it with a new kind of energy. And George R.R. Martin, he takes a spin on this, and he has something very powerful to say about what romance means, what relationships can mean between two people who come from two, not inextricably, but from two places where there can be no hope, there can be no relationship, and yet they find it. And it is my favorite romantic ending to any book. And again, nobody's kissing, nobody's having sex with each other. I know. But what it provides, and so if I say, Josh Roundtree wrote the second best epilogue I've ever read, Fever Dream is the best epilogue that I've ever read.
Yeah.
And I think that any writer who wants to be able to see a place so clearly, who wants to be able to feel a feeling in such a powerful way that they lose all their self-conception in what the whole story wraps up into, that in the end, all we have is each other. Even after people are gone, that the memory of them remains. And the memory at times can be just as powerful if it, albeit a little colder than when they were alive, but the memory still counts. What we do in life counts. It makes an impact. And for me, Fever Dream does that better than any other book I've ever read. For me, it's probably my favorite novel.
It's one of the most romantic endings I've ever read. So that's saying something.
It's really underrated too. I can't believe there's so many people out there that haven't read it. I'm always just like, do you like stories? Oh my God, Sophia. Yes. Fucking now. That's funny. Okay. I also am going to, because I see Dennis is hanging around. So I do want to shout out some of my Patreon peeps that I love who have some really fun endings that they really like too. Because one of the suggestions was like, oh, why didn't I pick that? That is like for sure, like one of the best endings ever. But I do want to talk about Strange Sally Diamond really quick. Because this is like a new favorite ending for me. This is the first time I'd ever kind of experienced an ending like this. So what the author chose to do, and this is Liz Nugent, who is an Irish thriller author, but her and I, because I had to DM her too, of course, but her and I had like an argument over whether this was like horror or not. She's like, no, it's a thriller. And I'm sure she said it in like a really cute Irish accent. And I was like, no, listen to me. Horror, like straight up. Basically, what she did at the end of this is pull the rug out from the ending that you thought you were going to get. So I very, very clearly thought what was going to happen was happening. And we were moving along toward that trajectory. And I was like, cool. I'm like really cool with this ending. And then all of a sudden at the last minute, that rug was yanked out from under me. And I was like, wait, no, that's not the way this was supposed to go down. And I was reading the last like 5 sentences over and over again because I was like, no. Like, so I think that is a very effective way is to know exactly what the audience and what your readers think they're getting and then to fuck them over at the last minute.
Right.
It was a good idea.
One of the best ways, like if a writer is thinking about how to do that, so we've seen this, it's become more prevalent in film now, where there's a more realistic take on violence, right? It's not like guys shoot, like somebody's shooting somebody like, blood, guts, everything, right? What is a more honest reaction and what you're talking about this ending is when you see someone pull a gun on someone in a film and someone goes, no, wait, bang. That's what that is. And so if you're a writer thinking about it, what you're trying to build up to is how do I get to no, wait, bang.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have your hammer strike of a sentence. And one of the writers who's done this is Daniel Krauss in Whale Fall. And I said this on a previous podcast that it's very difficult for a writer to be able to move through the text and move through the story and to have a reoccurring theme. And for Daniel Krauss in Whale Fall, he pulls a line from the 14th chapter of Moby Dick, which is Father Mapple's sermon, which is, "O sleepers, arise," right? And what he does is he's able to take this particular message all the way through the book, and then he surprises the reader in such a way that we do not expect it at the very end. And for anyone who hasn't read Whale Fall, I would recommend it to them. I wouldn't quite classify it as horror. I think it's more of a trauma novel, which doesn't remove any of its power or validity as an excellent book. But for writers who are looking to find a way to build a thread line through their story, to be able to say, I want to show you, like you were talking about, Red, like I want to show you something from the very beginning, and I want to bring it full circle, and then I'm going to hit you with it like a hammer strike. Krauss does that.
Yeah, and somebody included it on their list of their favorite YA novels. And I didn't realize that it was also classified as YA. But the protagonist is 17, which I also didn't pick up on.
Right.
So it's a for everyone book.
I think so too.
Yeah, for sure. So when I pitched this to my patron members, I was like, hey, if you guys have, any great book endings, like, let me know. And Michael Clark pitched this to us, Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bazterrica. Yes, to this. This is this is translated fiction. Augustina Bazterrica lives in Argentina. It is a very, I don't want to say passionless, but it's one of those, it's very clinical, the way that the horror and the tragedies are kind of just like, I don't even know. I don't have the language that Seth has to communicate this, but the horrors are told in almost like a clinical way to where you're not like really emotionally invested in a lot of the characters, and you just kind of observe events as they're happening until the very last maybe page. And then the devastation that it has on you as a reader is just like, I thought about this book. It lingered with me for months after I read it, where it would come back to me and I would be like, I can't believe she did that.
Right.
It was bold. That was a bold, harsh move.
Right.
You haven't read that.
It is. So in many ways, this is a trick that Cormac McCarthy also pulls, and I like it a lot. And I will say I've never actually had an opportunity to use it myself, but I like describing it like this. It's like you're it's like a reader walking into a room and there's a table. And on the table, as the reader walks closer and closer to it, right? Imagine a single spotlight down on a stainless steel table, right? And you walk closer and closer and you see something glimmering on top of the table that isn't the same color as the stainless steel, but it's a different gradient of color. And you walk closer and closer and you see that it's the flat blade of a butcher's knife. Or not even a butcher's knife. It's more like a cleaver is what it is. The breadth of the blade is so wide. It seems so heavy. And you start to think to yourself, all of the bad things that can happen if someone picked it up, right? But it's just the flatness of the blade. It's just the object. That's what Tender of the Flesh is doing. It's like, I don't have to describe the horror to you because you can see it. And then at the very end, the person who brought the reader into the room picks up the knife and goes, now I'll show you, and whack, right in the neck.
That's exactly how that felt.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. I haven't read Tender is the Flesh, but it's on my TBR. But when you're talking about that clinical voice, it made me think of Charlene Elsby's work, especially Violent Faculties. And she does this trick that I think is so brilliant and pretty unique to her. I haven't seen it done a lot, where the main character is very stream of conscious and goes off on these philosophical tangents to such a degree that you almost forget the horror situation that you're in. So there'll be this pages long philosophical sort of rambling. And then Charlene will just gut you with 2 sentences of what they did violently to the other character. And it's a total gut punch because you never see it coming. She does it over and over and over again, but every time those long chunks of just inner monologue, they make you forget and they lull you into a place of vulnerability. And then she describes this horrendous act.
I love that.
It's the anti-Jack in the Box trick, right? Most horror writers think what you have to be doing is da-dum, da-dum, da-da-da-da-dum. Da-dum, da-dum, and the reader's like, oh, it's coming! It's gonna pop out of the box, it's gonna freak me out, right? It's the exact opposite. It's you don't even know that I'm turning a handle. I'm playing a song for you, right? And that you're right. That's a difficult trick to pull off because you have to keep the reader engaged in such a nuanced, clear way that they're like, oh yeah, everything's gonna be it's the whack right in the neck. That's great. I love
That's
that.
great. One ending that Dennis had this to say, the ending to The Lesser Dead by Christopher Buehlman is a great ending. The Coda chapter was amazing. He said he listened to the audiobook my first time and he was blown away. One of his favorite endings of all time. And he also agreed to the ending of Fever Dream, which was mentioned already. So Dennis, I totally agree with you on The Lesser Dead. That last chapter, you kind of turned the page with, I don't want to say like a hope in your heart, but you're kind of like settled with how it ended. You're like, okay, yeah, I can get with that. Then you turn the page and you read and you're like, wait,
This is all some old bullshit.
we did something else here. we either backpedaled on that delivery or Christopher Buehlman is really trying to hate his readers right now.
So Dennis and I agree on 50% of his points. I don't like Christopher Buehlman's end to The Lesser Dead. But here's what I do respect, though, is that there are times an author will attempt, and again, Christopher is, I know him, like he and I hang out. Mr. Buehlman, he goes for something daring, right? He throws caution to the wind and he says, you thought I gave you one thing, but here's what it actually is. And there's a bravery in that a lot of writers stay away from, because they do want their readers to be like, the end. Wasn't that wonderful? And he goes, hey, check this out.
Yeah.
Right. So I respect it. I don't like it. Like, I don't like that particular ending, but game recognized game.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that I felt a little tricked, but I also felt like the main character was a bit of a prankster and a bit of an outlier, so it made sense since he was very intimately whispering this story to the reader. I felt like I believed that. I believed that could happen. Yeah. That could go down that way.
So thank you, Dennis.
Dennis is right here, and he said, I look at it a bit differently, but I get what you're saying. So
okay. We'll put the guns away.
Love the book discussion that we're having here.
Well, that falls right in line with what I was going to say, which is that it's a very dangerous move to make as an author, to do that last minute switcheroo. High payoff if it works and massively deflating if it doesn't as a reader.
Right.
Yeah, we're definitely not talking about our least favorite endings, because I feel like that would be crushing. Right. But I will say that Michael, who talked about Tender as the Flesh, also mentioned that he liked the ending of The Shawshank Redemption, the short story The Shawshank Redemption, which I loved it too. But Stephen King is like notoriously bad with endings. Like, I feel like there's been so many times where I've read the ending and I'm just like, seriously?
Yeah. like The Stand. You're gonna make me sit here for 1,300 pages. You're gonna end with that?
Yeah.
Obviously Stephen King's sold 700 million billion books.
Right. He can do what he wants, but
I'm like,
a lot of times
baby.
I've been disappointed. Right. The Dark Tower series was like, you talk about what the fuck endings. I was a certain type of way after I finished that.
A lot of people are a certain type of way. You're like, oh, really? Okay. We're gonna do that? Okay, that's fine. I'll never read this again. Right?
Yes.
So I had a question I wanted to throw around the room as we're drawing, as the taper light begins to draw low on our conversation. Because I wanted to know from the two of you, what makes a great ending? What is the anatomy of a great ending for you? And I'll tell you what I was thinking, so that y'all will have a little bit of time to think about it.
Thank you.
You're welcome, because I know we didn't talk about springing a question here. But for me, an ending, and I know I talked about it a little bit, and the most important thing for an author to consider with their ending is that it feels earned. That the reader, because like you said before, Ray, if the author says, I'm going to tell you a secret at the end of this, and you're going to be completely changed by what I'm going to reveal in your life. Right. And we get to that point, we get to the ending, and you're like, the secret is, I didn't have a secret. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And because it doesn't feel earned, that's where a lot of endings fall flat. And that's typically because the author is like trying to get to the ending and they're like, okay, the book's supposed to end now. Right. And then so it doesn't congeal together. All of the ingredients don't come together in a singular, in one wholesome flavor. Right. And so I think whenever we're talking about endings, so long as your reader feels like at no point, I mean, the minimum value is I didn't feel cheated, right? That's the lowest, like the lowest calorie is, it was good. The ending was what I expected, yada, yada. That's what is the minimum value. The highest point is when we get to the ending and it feels so earned and it feels like everything may have not have gone the way that I thought, but I'm so glad that I took the journey, right? That's what earned feels like, because it says from author to reader, or the reader gets to say to the author, I trusted you and you kept your promise to me. And there's nothing like that in the world when you can nail an ending like that. For me, that's what a great ending is.
What about you, Ray? I want to save like reader feedback for the end. I want to hear from another author.
I think I like two very different kinds of endings equally as much. The first is when the characters get exactly what they deserve. And so, when we talk bittersweet, that's usually how that shakes out, because I like to read about flawed characters and I want them to get it in a way that I didn't see coming. So that's one type that I love, when they get exactly what they deserve. On the other end, on the more tragic end of the spectrum, I also really appreciate when a character has kind of a fall, or, maybe we feel like they deserved better, but it's a direct result of the consequences of the mistakes they made during the events of the book.
Consequences.
Yes. So I'll appreciate that just as much if, like, I've been rooting for this character the whole time and they ultimately don't get what maybe like they deserved morally or as a human, but it was a direct result of this path that we walked with them. I'll also cling on to that.
That's great.
That is great. I think for me, I want that ending to feel like a return on my investment. I feel like I also have earned. I have put in the time. I have put in many hours, and I would like to get a return on my investment. And that could look in a multitude of ways. Like you said, I could be satisfied with consequences. I could be satisfied with just desserts. I could be satisfied with a happy ending and everything is fine. Like, there's lots of ways that I feel satisfied. I just don't want it to feel like it fizzled out.
Right.
Like it was a leftover, like it was the last thing they worked on and it just kind of was a throwaway. They phoned it in.
Right.
I don't want that, because if I put in the time and the effort, I want a return on that. I remember very clearly watching the last episode of Lost, and I was pissed. I felt like the fucking writers phoned that fucking ending in. I was angry with it. Like, you had no idea from start to finish where that thing was going to end up, and you guys just roundtable discussed a horrible ending. Like, I don't want the character to wake up. I don't want this whole thing to have been an afterlife. No, like, give me answers to my questions.
Right. Every author should avoid this, and that is the pie in the face. Always avoid the pie in the face. Like, and it's I love it that you said you don't want it to fizzle out, because readers, what readers cannot handle is for the story to go and flatten at the end. But you can whisper, right? It can end in a whisper. There's a line from Moby Dick where Father Apple says, his ears like two seashells still murmuring of the ocean. It can be quiet, but it's got to have the resonance of something grand inside of it, that the reader can be like, I never want to stop hearing this whisper. Like this sound, though it is a shell, and I may be nowhere near the ocean, I can still hear its resonance in this place. So I totally agree with you. I think that that's a great point.
Yeah, Steinbeck ends his books like that often, where I feel like he is saying goodbye to me and I don't want to go. Like
Right.
It's almost like a hug. Like, we've come a long way, traveler, and now it's time for us to part ways. And I'm always like, please don't go. I'm not ready to go. I'm not ready to leave this place. Like, and they're not like big impact endings where I could like tell you exactly what happened. I just know that at the end of it, I was crying that he was gone. Like that, that's how
I
Steinbeck does it. Go ahead, Ray. I'm sorry.
Where Lost failed, and where what started as one of my favorite shows ever, Dexter, failed. And a mistake that I think writers can make as well is not delivering on the promise of the premise. So like, for example, in Dexter, the promise of the premise, like the question we're asking the viewers is, does Dexter deserve to be punished for all these heinous acts against heinous men? Do we want to see him punished? And the series avoids the question for however too many seasons, because it doesn't want to end. It wants to keep making money. So then we get that fizzle out, and you never give the viewers what you promised them for all of these hours. And it's frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, doesn't that seem like the least amount of effort is to just keep track of all the loose ends you've opened and like at least tie off like a handful? Jesus.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. So let me see. There was a question back in here from Sophia. Here we go. Curious how you folks tackle endings when you write. Do you know the ending when you start writing a story, or are you a pantser?
Thank you, Sophia. That's a great question. I'm so excited to answer it. I'll kick it over to Ray.
I never know how it's going to end. The exception is the Stradivarius because it's a retelling. But no, I need to write my way through it. And if I try to like predetermine the ending, it always feels flat when I get there. So like for Merciless Waters, I didn't know how it was going to end until I was almost done writing it. And then it just sort of like came to me that this was what I felt the characters deserved based on their choices through the story.
That's great. I am the exact. So here's the thing. When I started writing, I was like, I never write an ending. Never. Like, I want to get there to the final point and have it be like you're talking about, Ray. But here's the thing. So I was working on That Light Sublime, and I finished book 2, and I wrote about a chapter into book 3. And I was sitting there, and I was in my well, and I'm like, everything is hitting right. And all of a sudden the ending just happened to me. And so I wrote the ending before I had the other 71,000 words of the novel. But I knew that was the right ending. Like I could feel it in like sort of like a cloak of protection that was like, everything's going to be okay because now we know where we're going. We've been going along. We have an idea about what we want to do, but now we know where home is, right? And the same thing happened with my Blackwell series, and I'm in a real pickle with this because I've written the first 3 books in the series. I'm working on the 4th book, sort of, kind of. Sorry, Becky LeJune, my agent. But I am desperately working on it up here, not so much here. But I have written the last chapter and the last epilogue, or the epilogue for book 5. But I'm not even there yet. But now I know where home is at. I just have to be able to trust the road, that the road will lead there. And honestly, for writers, that's the hardest thing for us sometimes, is to be able to trust and to say, no, yes, I do know what I am doing. I am a great writer. I must have confidence in myself that the story I am telling, only I can tell. I'm the only one who knows this path, even though I've never walked it before. That's what a writer has to feel when they're on their way to the ending. And you can't be afraid of it. You have to completely allow it to subsume you, to fill you up and be like, I trust myself. I know that I can do this. And that's where great endings come from. Never pull back, always write for power, and, do something brave. Try to touch people in a way that leaves them unashamedly changed, I think is a way to put it.
Yeah, Sophia mentioned high stakes. And I think that that's really important if you have a book of high stakes and you know that your readers are getting emotionally involved. Seth, I'm sure you realize that your readers were emotionally involved. I mean, you have characters that we have followed through 2 whole novels. And so by the time we get to The Light of a Black Star, you essentially are holding the reader's emotions in your hands. And it felt like you had that responsibility and you were aware of that responsibility and you didn't take it lightly. So, I appreciate and I can tell when an author is being sensitive to their audience in that way. But also not holding back on like hurting our feelings if it comes to it,
Right. Yeah. And again, I appreciate that. That's very sweet of you to say. And it means a lot coming from you, who I so deeply respect. Certainly your critical opinion on not just the genre, but in literature in general. I think that a writer has the responsibility to be able to come to the end of a book and be affected by it, and to be looking in the reader, or be looking at the reader, both of you, though you are separated by time and space and so many other things, geographical location, it is a psychic stare between two people. And then at the end of it, I want the reader to go, or I want to be able to say to the reader, or hear me say, I know, I feel the same way.
Yeah, that's important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we can close on this. Can we just have an open chat line with CS when we're battling writer imposter syndrome, the CS Humble pep talk line? And then someone said, perhaps we could have a bat phone.
So I want to, this is really interesting. If I can for just a second, this is important for me. This is important. There are no imposters. There are only storytellers. That is all that exists. There are some people who have different levels of mechanical quality. Mechanical quality can be learned, but you are not an imposter. If you are telling a story, then your story reaches back to all the way to the beginning, from the caveman drawing on walls to the skalds, the bards, the poets, and the great fiction writers of the modern period. There are no imposters. And so therefore, if there are no imposters, then you cannot be one. You can only be who you are. And when you're sitting in the chair, and I talk with writers about this all the time, when you are sitting in the chair, you have to believe that you're the best working writer in the world today. And it doesn't have to be real in order for it to be true to you. So if you start hearing your inner critic reach out to you and grab you by the throat and say, you're not good enough, you simply say with a clear, calm voice, you're a liar. That's all you have to do. And it's the hardest, best thing you can ever do as a writer, is to say, I trust the person inside of me. So do that.
What a great ending.
Mic drop.
A great ending for a discussion about endings. Thank you, Seth.
Sure.
And thank you everyone for coming. This was like a wonderful discussion. I love that we can just like wing it like that. It was really great. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. Wonderful.
So, thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, we're going to say goodbye to all of you, but you two stay put.
Toodles.